Some here today. Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the Community Transit Board of Directors Workshop for October 23rd, 2025. This meeting is conducted in hybrid format, both in person and remote, and is recorded and live streamed. I'd like to ask Rachel, our board clerk, to call the roll, please.
Councilmember Daughtry.
Present.
Councilmember Dunn is absent today. Mayor Frizzell is also absent. Labor Representative Julian, I know, is online and joining in progress. Mayor Marine. Councilmember Merrill. Thank you. Mayor Nearing.
I'm here, thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Peterson. Mayor Roberts.
Here.
Thank you. And Councilmember Schweddy.
Present.
And did I get you, Councilmember Merrill?
You did.
Okay, perfect.
I'm still here.
Like, did I get you? Okay, want to confirm. Okay, terrific. We do have a quorum of board members, and for our board alternates, it doesn't look like we have anyone in attendance today. So that does conclude roll.
Thank you, Rachel. We're on to public comment. Each speaker has 3 minutes to provide comments. Remarks must be relevant to community transit services, programs, projects, or activities. We start with in-room comments. Is there anybody signed up? Anybody in the room that wants to make public comments? It's not staff here today. See any online besides our CEO that wants to make public comments?
Besides the CEO.
Oh, okay. We'll close the public comment section. And that will lead us right to the Chief Executive Officer's report. Rick, you're on.
Great. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Well, thank you for coming together today. Sorry I can't be there with you in person. I appreciate the technology giving us an opportunity to join virtually and cover some important topics today. I don't have a CEO report per se. I'll just preview a little bit our 2 topics. We're going to present our first ever biennial budget covering operating and capital and administrative expenses for 2026 and 2027. So we're really excited to kick that process off and present that to you and go over the things we hope to accomplish in the coming couple of years. And then in addition, we will be presenting the feedback that we have received through a very robust period of public engagement on our next SWIFT project, the SWIFT Gold Line. We've got a great team assembled to present to you what we've heard from the community and the different tools we used to engage and hear from folks. And then we'll also talk about what we heard and how we're proposing to move forward in the design process to address communities' ideas, interests, concerns, questions, et cetera, to plan and design a project that reflects the community's interests. So 2 great topics today. Looking forward to the discussion.
Okay. All right. Well, that will lead us right into our presentations. And Rick, do you want to set this up then? Do you want to set the
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir, Mr. Chair. Just so I'll make a few observations at a high clip, and then Mary and the budget team are here to walk you through the details of the proposed biennial budget. As you've seen and heard many times now, it is our very first biennial budget, so we'll probably hear that a few more times today. But we're really excited about it because we think it's going to give us some real exciting efficiencies in our administrative path and staff and processes going forward. So a few quick and high level observations. Our strategic priorities will continue to be 3. We are first and foremost focused on attracting and retaining customers and continuing to provide expanding and heavily utilized mobility services throughout the county. We will continue to focus as well on strengthening the employee experience, where we want to continuously improve our employee engagement scores and lead in our industry and in the region on retention, and really be an employer of choice. And then thirdly, of course, we want to operate in a sustainable manner. We want to focus on limiting our footprint to the extent we can on the planet and the region, but we also want to operate financially sustainably. And you'll see in our budget presentation that we're showing how we'll do just that. And of course, we want to be sustainable as an organization in terms of building and retaining the skills and the workforce necessary to sustain this organization so that we leave it in good shape for our successors. So those are our three strategic priorities. In terms of our proposed budget for the year or the 2 years ahead, a couple of things I'd like to flag. First, we'll continue in a service growth mode, although we will be seeing the end of the deployment of the 2024 and beyond network. And we'll begin really looking at what we've learned with the new network since light rail opened and since we started restructuring our services all the way back in the spring of 2024. And we'll focus our attention on applying that learning to optimizing our network across the county and continuing to do everything we can to provide high quality service that's useful and responsive to our customers' needs. So about 130,000 additional service hours across all modes specifically are proposed in this biennial budget. And that also assumes the deployment of 2 additional ZIP pilot areas. A word about that, we're operating 3 pilot areas today, as you know, in addition to the Alderwood area. We will be bringing back evaluation results and recommendations for the board to consider acting on the final disposition of the 3 current pilot areas. And then, of course, in the proposed biennial budget, where we made an assumption of 2 additional areas beyond that. Those decisions would come to the board subsequently through our service planning process, where we are integrating future ZIP planning into our service planning based process. So there will be decisions ahead for the board to make about how ZIP and fixed route and other services expand, and we will bring those decisions to you on a case-by-case basis. The budget itself provides that broad fence line of resources to allow you to iterate and make those decisions over the course of the next 2 years. We're also assuming that we'll continue our extension and expansion of our BRT network, the Green Line extension, the Gold Line project, which you'll hear more about later today, and the improvements at Everett Station and Smoky Point up north. And of course, beyond that, then safety and security continues as a major priority. In terms of adding customers and strengthening the employee experience, safety and security is at the heart of that. This budget proposes 14 additional transit security officers, which will give us the ability to patrol our entire SWIFT system. We will also see through implementation of our coach operator barrier door project, which will be heavily in swing in 2026, pardon the pun. And we've got a number of other safety improvements included here as well. On the capital side, we assume that we will continue with our zero emission side-by-side pilot project. And also we will make our first order of 10 additional battery electric buses. We are assuming we will move forward as well with improving facilities over at Hardison campus with the vehicle maintenance final improvements on the offices next to the shop. And we'll also start work on Cash Park across the street. We will complete the transition of our contracted commuter bus services to in-house operation, where we will be bringing essentially 138 new FTEs across from Transdev and integrating them into the community transit workforce. So lots of big things ahead. The next slide gives you a sense of the scale of the budget compared to the current year budget. We are proposing an increase in operating, as you can see there, from $253 million this year to $277 next year and $283 in 2027. You also see there the continuation of a robust capital program shown in light blue. It looks to the eye here like our capital costs or our capital budget's coming down a little bit, but really we're carrying forward funding, and we're also, with most of our projects in the design and planning phases that'll lead to construction in years beyond 2027. We're also proposing to transfer and make some draws on some of our reserves to support our capital investments. So you'll see that here as well. I'd highlight a couple of things in terms of revenues and expenditures. Our revenues continue to grow modestly, and we assume that modest growth will continue in 2026 and 2027. Relatively flat growth is assumed for next year and a little bit more robust growth in 2027. So our operating revenues will continue to exceed our operating expenses. And so we are presenting a budget that is balanced as well as robust. I don't think I need to highlight too much more here. I'm going to leave it to Mary to go through the detailed services, but I want to really emphasize the fact that in terms of service planning and service expansion, you're going to see a new approach in the next 2 years to really looking at digesting what we've learned from the 2024 and beyond network, looking deep into every corner of the county and analyzing how our services can complement each other, and then bringing some ideas back to this board to really engage in how we want to see our network evolve in the future. So with that, I think what I'll do is go to the final slide I've got to show you, which is our 6-year outlook on the financial side. And this shows how our budget is balanced across the next 6 years. This is a snapshot from our long-range financial model. The green line there shows our assumed revenues. Dark blue, our operating expenses. Light blue is capital, with yellow being draws on reserves. And I think what I want to do now, since Mary is queued up and ready, is turn it over to her to jump into the details and give you a deeper and a richer picture of what we're proposing here. So I'll tie it off there, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the time to introduce this important topic.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Mary, it's all about you.
Thank you. So I wanted to give a big shout out to the Creative Services team for this lovely budget cover. They really did a great job this year. And then kudos to the budget team and to all of our department staff for their hard work on our first ever biennial budget. Our goal is to keep this presentation brief so that we can get to your questions. You should have a budget book provided to you in PDF format, although there are some copies available in hard copy as well. These should be fairly similar to the budget documents from the past years. I did want to call out the CEO message and the executive summary. Those should give most of the information that you would want to see if you read those, but there is a lot more content in the budget document. As you see the slides, you'll notice that there are page number references. So if you want more information about a certain topic, you can reference the page number in your document pretty easily. I would encourage you, though, to read the whole document. We have great information about our departments, what they're up to, their goals, their past year accomplishments, and other interesting information. So with that, Sarah and I will take you through the nuts and the bolts of our biennial budget. You may ask questions as we go along or save them for the end. This summarizes our budget highlights. In operations, as Rick mentioned earlier, we're adding 130,000 service hours for all modes across the biennium. The Cache Park Contracted Services Transition Plan is prominently featured in this budget. The budget can accommodate 2 new ZIP pilot zones. We're proposing 198 new staff. Most of them are coach operators and other operations staff, as well as new transit security officers. And then we have other increases for such areas as professional services. This would be things like research and community outreach, as well as maintenance for our buses and buildings and software costs. Lots of new capital in the 2-year budget. We're expanding the Smoky Point Transit Center and the Everett Transit Centers. There are several Swift Green Line expansion projects, including a new BRT purchase. This year's capital budget also features multiple vehicle replacements, probably more replacements than in the past several years. We're coming up to needing new buses, as well as replacement darts, new van pool vans, and also expansion vans. This capital budget also puts forward an enhanced bus stop program, as well as several zero emissions projects, including a technology suite and charging infrastructure. The design phase for the Cache Park renovation and remodel, that's that FMP 8 design project, will start up during the biennium. And we're also proposing removing and replacing an underground storage tank at Cache Park. Very important state of good repair project for the agency. We have some fairly significant capital projects that are underway and being carried over. We have a $21 million remodel for the Hardison Campus Vehicle Maintenance Office and Parts building. Also, several zero emissions projects are carrying forward, and that would include the side-by-side pilot and some other zero emissions projects. The Swift Gold Line design continues, as well as the next generation Orca Phase 2 project. And then the important safety project, the transit driver barrier doors, is being continued into 2026. For the biennium, our operating revenue will total $572 million. You can see on the left-hand side the revenue by year. I know $572 million sounds like an awful lot. We're looking at slow but steady growth from 2025 to 2027, about 3% growth in 26 and another 3% in 2027. Sales tax remains our most significant source of operating revenue, and that provides us with 73% of our total operating revenues. Sound Transit is another 9%. Between our different categories of grants and contributions, our federal, state, and local grants, that's about 8% of our budget. Fares is roughly 5% of our budget. Another significant source of revenue embedded in that other category is our investment interest. As short-term investment rates remain pretty high and the reserves that we're carrying also remain high, we are expecting about $15 million in investment revenue next year and another $14 million the year after. The expectation is, as we utilize some of those reserves on various planned projects, as well as see the feds lower the interest rates, we expect that revenue to decline slightly over several years. This is our historic and projected sales tax revenue. Over the past several years, we've seen some relatively flat sales tax collections. 2022 is the last year that we really had some significant growth from the prior year. Sales tax does depend on a number of drivers: population growth, business growth, inflation on taxable retail goods and services also will drive our sales tax growth. We do expect as personal income growth continues that we'll get some benefit from that in terms of our sales tax. Building and construction segments of our retail sector are probably what's impacting the recent flat growth. With interest rates being high for mortgage lending and business lending, we're just not seeing, I think, the same level of retail sales in the housing or the building sectors. So we do expect as those rates come down that we'll see a rebound in those categories. These growth rates in 26 through 30 reflect what's in the adopted transit development plan. We're projecting relatively flat revenues this year, although new developments since the transit development plan was constructed and adopted indicate that we might do a little bit better than our 2025 forecast. We're expecting a slight rebound in 2026 and then a little bit more growth in 27 and 28, followed by a return to our historic growth rate of 4%. We utilize the Puget Sound Economic Forecaster as a source of economic information for the Puget Sound region. While 5% and 4% may sound optimistic compared to our recent history, it is less than what the Puget Sound Economic Forecaster is predicting for Snohomish County for retail sales growth. We've chosen to go slightly more conservative than their 8% and 7% retail sales growth projections. Need to stay a little bit conservative, but in the event that we do realize more revenue than our budget anticipates, I would be pleased to bring forth a biennial amendment with that adjustment contained therein. Our other key revenues include fair revenues and state grant revenues. Local revenues have now become our most prominent source of fair revenues. That replaces commuter revenues. As we've transitioned to local bus service feeding light rail to downtown, we do not have a commuter services category. Van pool is also growing. You'll see in the service hour slide that van pool is anticipated to grow. We now have a slice of pie showing microtransit fares. It's not a little line, it's now an actual slice of pie as that service becomes more significant. Our state grant revenues are also larger than they've been in past years. Because community transit adopted a youth ride free fare policy, we were able to be eligible for that transit support operating grant. The state has granted us $23 million over their biennium. That's about 3/4 of our total state grant revenues. We also receive a special needs operating grant in the amount of about $4 million for the biennium. That funds our paratransit program, or partly funds, I should say, our paratransit program. And as we've received in the past, we're still getting the commute trip reduction, transportation demand management grant. In the biennium, we also expect to get some one-time funding from WashDOT for World Cup activities, about $900,000. And then we'll get about $2 million over the biennium for operating our Swift Orange line. I'll mention just briefly that we do get some federal grants. We do utilize our Marysville UZA formula grants for operations. Service hours form the basis for much of our operating budget. The number of coach operators, mechanics, vehicle parts, fuel, and other maintenance costs really depend on the service hours that we intend to deliver in the coming years. So we feel it's important to talk about our service hours that we project for the current year and then our growth. This shows service hours by mode. That dark blue is the fixed route bus service. We're anticipating growing from a projected 469,000 hours in the current year to 503,000 next year. That includes the contracted commuter hours that we're transitioning in, as well as impacts from the 2024 and beyond service enhancements. And then we'll grow an additional 12,000 fixed route hours in 2027. Vanpool is also growing steadily. We're looking at over 100,000 hours next year, growing to 116,000 hours in 2027. DART will stay relatively constant. ZIP is also projected to grow. The 2025 service hours are our projection. This is an increase from what we showed you last year in the budget presentation. So our ZIP has exceeded expectations. We do have hours in the 2026 projected budget that would accommodate the addition of additional zones, should the board approve those. Additional zones or the continuation of the pilots would be approved by you all when the appropriate time comes. I'm going to turn the presentation over now to Sarah. Sarah will talk about expenditures and the capital budget.
All right. Thank you, Mary. So community transit uses a single enterprise fund, and then we break that down into different managerial funds. On this slide, we're looking at just our general fund, which covers our operating expenses and also transfers to other funds for reserves or for the capital program. Here, we've got a biennial general fund operating expenditures budgeted at $560.1 million. That's up about 9.6% in 2026 from 2025 and about 2.1% in 27 over 2026. The bar graph is showing budgeted operating expenses by year, while the pie chart is just showing the major department expense categories. Purchase transportation, while not the largest category, has the most impact on this biennial budget, as we're going to be bringing some of that service previously operated by TransDev to in-house. We'll cover these at a high level today, and then the budget document includes more details. Costs for purchase transportation overall are going down about 31% in 2026 over 2025 and 21% in 2027 over 2026. That's a combination of decreases from the contracted services transition and then increases in other contracts, such as microtransit and DART. Personnel expense is budgeted at $348 million for the biennium and includes about 198 new positions. These additional positions primarily support the contracted services transition as well as other service increases. In the next slide, we'll take a closer look at those staffing changes. Services are increasing 15% overall for 2026 and just an additional 0.5% in 2027 over 26. These changes are mostly in the categories of contract maintenance, software leases, and intergovernmental services. Our fuel is budgeted at $37 million for the biennium. Changes in the fuel budget are impacted by changes in service, and we've increased the budgeted diesel rate, and we've also got a volume increase in there. We monitor our fuel prices closely, and we've also retained our $5.5 million fuel reserve in case the prices go up. And finally, the budget for parts and supplies is increasing about 30% in the biennium, and that's purely a volume increase. Right, here we're looking at our staffing. We measure employees in full-time equivalent units and categorize them using the FTA's National Transit Database categories. They divide employees into two main groups and then further divide the operating group into 4 categories. The bar chart is showing our overall growth in FTE from 2024 through 2027, with the operating and capital staff shown separately. As you can see, our capital staffing is staying fairly steady, and most of the growth is in the operating group. Right. So in 2025, we saw budgeted staffing increases of 163 FTE over 2024, and that figure includes the 50 FTE we added in the mid-year amendment when we decided to bring the TransDev service in-house. Net FTE growth in 26 and 27 is 198 FTE, with most of those budgeted to start throughout 2026. Altogether, about 80% of the positions added from mid-year 2025 through 2027 are in support of that TransDev transition. Of those positions in 26 and 27, half of them are coach operators, almost 100. Almost a quarter are vehicle maintenance staff. And then we've got those additional 14 transit security officers that Rick mentioned earlier. The remainder are parts, facilities, and others. On page 74 of the budget document, you can see a full list of positions, including information on which of those are related to the contracted services transition. In the pie chart here, we're looking at the distribution of operating employees among the 4 NTD categories. For many years, we've had an internal benchmark of only having about 20% general administrative staff in proportion to the others. That helps us ensure that we're hiring our staffing, thoughtfully and mindfully, and not going overboard in one category versus the other. That percentage is trending down. Up here, we've got the 5-year ratio, but we're really dropping down. We're going from about a 20% admin ratio in 2024 down to just about 17% in 2027. Now moving over to capital funds, our proposed capital budget for the biennium is $278.5 million. This chart is showing the breakdown of the program by new and carryover capital, and it also includes the personnel costs for those FTE that support the program. Again, we've got about 50 FTE each year. It goes up and down a little bit. Right. So capital projects are often multi-year endeavors, and the initial approval is typically for the full project budget. Unspent project funds carry over from year to year until the project is completed or closed. The 2026 to 2027 budget includes one rollover from 2025 to 2026, and we expect that some of the 2026 capital budget will roll to 2027 as well. In the next slide, we're going to look at the major categories of projects. All right, so here we're looking at the 2026 and 27 capital program by major category. The chart is including both the new and the carryover projects. Again, the budget for each project is the remaining life cycle budget and might be multi-year. I'll briefly describe each category and give a few example projects, many of which we'll have already mentioned earlier in the presentation. For full details, there's a list that has each project and which category it goes to that starts on page 55 of your budget document. Right, examples of projects in the SWIFT program include the Smoky Point Transit Center, the Gold Line Design and Engineering, Everett Station expansion, and the BRT buses for the Green Line extension. Replacement vehicles include the coaches, vans, and DART vehicles we mentioned earlier. We also have 2 replacement purchases that are categorized elsewhere. The BRT replacement buses are in the SWIFT category, and then there are 10 battery electric buses included in the zero emissions category. The State of Good Repair projects support upkeep for community transit's investments in both physical assets and information technology. There's an extensive list here, so you'll want to look at the budget document for those. Okay. Projects in the zero emissions program are including that order of 10 battery electric buses, a continued vehicle pilot, and then we have the 2 new ZE projects that Mary mentioned earlier. Facilities master plan includes the Hardison campus vehicle maintenance and parts department renovation, which is budgeted at about $21 million. And then we have another $5 million budgeted to start the design and early phase of the Cash Park operating base remodel and improvements. Reserves and contingencies are budgeted at 25 million. The other category includes minor projects such as expansion vehicles for Vanpool and personnel costs. And finally, the innovation category is including work and projects that are new to the agency and take us to a new level in some respect. Those projects are including the coach driver barrier doors, next generation Orca Phase 2, and our speed and reliability program. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Mary.
Thank you, Sarah. In 2026, we're looking to start the year with about 145 million in cash in the operating fund. After we receive revenues and spend our operating budget, we project an operating margin of about 5 million. We expect to transfer about 77 million to our capital projects to reserves, namely the facilities master plan reserve, as well as other funds such as the workers' compensation fund and our debt service fund. And then there's a small transfer back to the general fund for projects that have closed. We expect to end the year with about $76 million in cash. That covers our operating and our fuel reserves. Starting in 2027 with that estimated $76 million, we expect revenues of about 290 million, expenses of about 283 million, and we'll have an operating margin of about 7 million. We plan to transfer about $45 million for capital projects and also for some planned reserves and other uses, including the workers' compensation costs and debt service. We'll be transferring back some funds from several capital projects to the general fund, and we'll end the year with about $51 million in cash, and that covers our operating and fuel reserves. This slide shows a summary of our agency reserve balances. There's the operating reserve that we just talked about at the top. We're ending the year with 76 million and 51 million respectively. We also have a vehicle replacement reserve that aims to cover the next 2 years of net revenue vehicle replacement costs. So 46.5 million next year and 39 million the year after. We also retain a reserve of 27 million for infrastructure preservation. The agency has a significant investment in its facilities, its buildings, park and rides, and other facilities, as well as its IT information technology assets. We keep $17 million for facilities and $10 million for IT to ensure that those assets are kept in a state of good repair. Our largest reserve is the Facilities and Technology Reserve. For each year, we have $127 million in reserve for zero emissions projects. The second reserve we have is for service quality, innovation, and sustainability. If you can think back to the chart that Rick showed, that was the long range chart or the TDP chart, and there were some yellow spikes where we were showing use of reserves. We're starting to use some funds from the Service Quality Innovation and Sustainability Reserve. We set those funds aside when we were receiving stimulus funds because we were able to use those on operations and put some of our sales tax into a reserve. So we're using some of those funds on projects like the Everett Transit Center and the Smoky Point Transit Center expansions, as well as speed and reliability and the bus stop program. Our last reserve in the Facilities and Technology Fund is the reserve for FMP and other projects. We are contributing some funding to the F&P reserve in 2026 and 2027. We will have needs coming up for our facilities, particularly the renovation of the Cash Park operating base. In the 2026 and 27 budget, we've only budgeted the design phase for that renovation. So this will fund the renovation and other similar projects. So our reserves are estimated at 246.6 million for 2026, down to 213 million in 2027. We also have a reserve for our workers' compensation program. We base that off of actuarial calculations to cover the incurred claims that the actuary estimates. And then finally, we have a debt service fund where we build up a small balance to pay our debt payment every February and August. You will not see this in the next biennial budget presentation because Community Transit's 2017 bonds will be paid off in 2027. So overall, we're anticipating 402 million in reserves at the end of next year and 336 million in reserves at the end of 2027. So what is coming up next for the budget process? Currently, the public hearing on the budget is being advertised in the Everett Herald, thanks to our communications team, and this public hearing will be held on November 6th. As of this afternoon, the public comment period will be opened, and we will be collecting public comments from now until the 14th, with the major opportunity being the 6th for public comments. When you read your budget documents, if you still have questions, you can submit those to the finance leadership who are listed on the next slide. We're asking that you submit your comments by Friday, November 14th. We will take your comments or questions, we will answer them and provide you with answers at Finance Performance and Oversight on November 20th. We will also provide those responses to the full board of directors after Finance Performance and Oversight. Also at that committee meeting, we will present the budget resolution, and there is the option for a potential budget amendment should we require one. On December 4th, that is the target date for you to act on and approve the 2026 and 2027 budget. And then our deadline for having you approve our upcoming budget is December 31st, 2025. Does anyone have questions that we can answer? Or questions that we can't answer?
Board members, now would be a time to ask questions if you have any. Yeah, Councilmember Merrill.
I'm sure you covered it and I don't catch on how it works, but as we transfer from our bus lines going down, our commuter lines that are going down into Seattle, how do we replace that revenue? Because we're absorbing all of that in, and we were getting a lot of revenue from that. And I didn't see how that was offset and become part of what we are using for revenue now.
So we are getting the state transit support grant. So we knew that with some of the reduced and no cost fares, such as the youth fares, would have an impact. We also knew that the commuter fares would have an impact as well, but we are receiving that $23 million transit support grant, and that seems to more than offset losses or declines in in our fare revenues. They are growing since 2021, just not as fast as we would like them to. Did that help?
A little bit.
Little bit.
It sounds like there's not a, as I try to work my head into, it, there's not a, one-for-one offset on it, but we have a bunch of things that are offsetting this one big thing that we had.
That's correct.
And are all of those sustainable new things?
They appear to be for the time being.
Best we can hope for. Thank you.
Mm.
Okay, Councilmember Brown. Councilmember Daughtry.
On the transfer bus operators from TransDev, is that going to be we're getting 100% of them, or is there going to be some attrition from TransDev, and when is that supposed to be complete?
Roland, Mike, actually. Roland or Mike?
I'm happy to weigh in on that, and then if there's others that have more information, jump in. But so we're first is that we've designed a framework for that transfer in partnership with our ATU partners. So Danny and her team have been instrumental in helping us to craft MOUs to design how they come over in terms of things like seniority and all the mechanics of the labor side of it. In terms of how it's happening from a pace perspective, we're taking them in small bites at this point. So we had beginning earlier this year, we had our first tranche of operators come over. They're generally coming over at the same pace that the routes are transferring to community transit. So we brought the first route on board in March of this year. We brought more on in June, and most recently with the late summer, August, September service change. We'll do an additional tranche in December and then continue through the September service change of next year. So it's a gradual process. The largest group will be the last group to come over, and that will be with the September service change next year.
So we think that we're going to get all of them, or will we have some attrition?
We're going to get most of them is the current forecast. The initial sign up or indication of interest, we had most of the operators at TransDev indicating interest in coming to community transit. They were able to sign offer letters and so have secured a spot in terms of when their seniority would be effective. And then we keep bringing them over. They have to go through and graduate from our training process. And there is some attrition in that process, but I think we will, I'm looking at Mike, who's my program manager in this area, and I think it's safe to say that we're going to get most of them.
Okay, then, so September 26th is going to be the major portion of that, right? So now I lost my thought. In the budget for 2026, where we're talking about how many FTEs we're bringing in, that includes the TransDev. And then there's some more bus operators that we're hiring that is also included in that FTE. Okay.
Yeah, correct. There's both background community transit service expansion that's programmed into this biennial budget, as well as the transfer of operators from contracted status to in-house operations.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody online? Any other questions for today? Hello, we got one online. Yeah. We're not gonna let the CEO ask a question. I mean, it's not gonna happen. Rick?
Thank you, sir. Just a quick comment adding to Roland's response. The Strategic Alignment Committee had a briefing on the status of the transition at its last meeting, and Chair Merrill asked that full briefing be brought forward at the next board meeting so the full board can get an update on how it's going and have just a topic dedicated just to that in terms of a presentation. So we'll have more details and more opportunity to ask questions and engage in dialogue on how it's going and the different facets of the work at the next board meeting.
November 6th. Okay. All righty. Anybody else have questions? Very nice. I did the council member mayor speed read so far, and there's a lot there. And thank you for the summary today. I think this helps. I just had one quick question. So I noticed that FTEs are increasing over the biennium in most departments. How much of that is relatable to the TransDev transition?
I can answer that one. 80%.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. All right, it's good to know. Okay, I think that we are, got another big item following you guys up. Thank you so much for your presentation,
Thank you.
and we appreciate it. Any questions can go to the folks that are on the screen, and yeah, it's very nice book. Okay, we're gonna move on then to the Swift Gold line update. Melissa Colley's gonna lead the team, I think. Aren't you, Melissa? It's all yours.
Thank you, Chair Roberts. I think we're developing a good cadence of bringing back Swift Gold Line information, and the goal is to stay very well stitched together with our board members, especially when we're out doing community engagement and outreach. As a reminder, we have completed the scoping study for Gold Line, and that included our first round of outreach. And you'll remember in September, we awarded the contract for preliminary engineering. And this second round of engagement and outreach, which also included a survey, is really designed to help us figure out what are the answers that we need to, that questions we need to answer as we're in preliminary design. Rick likes to call it doing the math. And so we're going to share with you the results of that second round of engagement and outreach, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions. So I'm going to hand it off to Chelsea and Morgan to share that out.
Thanks so much, Melissa. So I'm Chelsea Ongaro, the Community Engagement Manager. So I manage the engagement for the Swift Gold Line project. And as Melissa said, today we're going to be talking about both that phase 2 engagement as well as some research that we did. We have someone from EMC that's online to present that, but we're going. There we go. Sorry about that. So I'll start off just with a little timeline reminder. We were here at the last board workshop to talk to you about the project and what we were going to share for the community engagement, just wanting to bring us all back together. Then I'll talk about the community engagement. Ian from EMC will talk about the research. I'll kind of summarize some key findings between the engagement and the research, and then Morgan will talk a little bit about next steps. So as Melissa said, we just wrapped up the scoping study and we'll be moving into the preliminary design and environmental. That's a multi-year process and there's more engagement involved in there. We'll talk about that in just a second. And then we move into a couple years of construction and the goal to launch the project in 2031. And you may remember seeing this slide previously. We have a multi-phased engagement process, which started in July 2024, where we did some engagement on route alignments in the Marysville area. The phase 2 engagement, which just took place from September 4th to October 2nd, 2025. That's where we asked about proposed station locations and bus lane options. And then next year, we're going to come back after we have some of that information from the preliminary design phase, where we're going to share some more details with folks and ask for feedback on that. And then later next year, we will ask for input on the draft locally preferred alternative, which is a technical term that just means the route alignment, where the stations will go, and how the buses will operate in the lanes. Okay, so diving into that phase 2 community engagement, we did a lot to share information about this project and gather input. At the last board workshop, I walked through some of the tactics we were using. I'm not going to touch on all of them here, but I'm going to touch on some high-level metrics from that. Overall, we got 626 total survey responses and comments. So that includes an engagement survey, which had 550 responses, as well as things like social media comments or email comments that people sent in other formats. We had about 8,000 people visit our online open house. So that was our main hub for information. It's where the survey lived. And we also tried out a shorter version of the survey called the Quick Poll. It only took 3 minutes to complete instead of the longer survey, and we had 28 people complete that as well. We did a lot of briefings out in the community. We talked with businesses, community organizations, state and federal elected officials, and Everett has a formal neighborhood group. So we went out and did briefings at the neighborhoods in the affected areas. You may also have seen the That Transit Show episode featuring Morgan McGrath in August about Swift Gold Line. Just on YouTube, there were more than 700 views of that, so it really helped to share information about the project. And we also did some paid Google advertising to share the online open house and encourage people to take the survey, and that got over 100,000 impressions, so it was a very successful approach. We did mailed postcards to residents within a half a mile of the corridor, and we did specific postcards to the businesses along the areas where we were proposing the center running transit only lanes, as well as the businesses in the downtown loop of Everett, just to make sure they were aware of the project. And we did email updates to hundreds of businesses, community organizations, and riders through our GovDelivery emails that we use. We did over 20 events in the communities, things like farmers markets, drop-in sessions at libraries, at which we talked to 668 people. So it was we were able to gather sort of micro feedback. Some of those people surely took the survey, but we also got to hear their feedback directly and answer their questions. And one area I really wanted to highlight were partnerships that we did. We did paid partnerships with 4 community organizations, and that actually resulted in 210 survey responses. So those were really successful partnerships and helped us reach vulnerable populations who would be most likely to use the Swift Gold Line. So what did we ask folks during this engagement period? We asked for feedback or their thoughts on proposed station locations, the bus lane options, so that is the center running transit only lanes, the BAT lanes, or the running in curbside, just like we do today. And then we also asked about potential pedestrian improvements to help people reach those future stations. As I mentioned, the online survey was available on the online open house from September 4th to October 2nd. We also, at those partner events with those community-based organizations, we brought paper surveys to those events and people were able to fill them out that way. All of the results that you're going to see are combined of the paper and electronic surveys. And respondents also had an opportunity to enter a sweepstakes for completing the survey. So this is just a little breakdown of how the responses were split by jurisdiction. 34% of folks lived in Everett, 25% in Marysville, and 11% in Arlington. We also asked a separate question about where people travel in the area, and those percentages were higher because many people travel across these jurisdictions. I also just wanted to flag the N equals there. So that's how many people answered this specific question. So you'll see that in some of the responses moving forward. So one of the questions we asked is, what is your opinion of the proposed Swift Gold Line? And the results were very positive. 85% of respondents expressed a favorable opinion of the proposed Swift Gold Line. So that's the strongly favorable and the somewhat favorable added together there. We also, following along with the other things we were asking about, we asked about the proposed station locations and the access improvements, so helping people get to those stations. And there were interactive map questions in the survey, so people could take a pin, which you're seeing screenshots of what all those pins were, and leave a comment on the pin about which station they would use the most and how they would use it, and other improvements they would like to see. You'll see here the key themes related to that. So for the stations, we got a lot of responses about key destinations in Smoky Point and Everett, especially around shopping and medical appointments. There were, in general, a lot of comments about just using the stations in the Everett area and getting down to Everett. Also transit connections at Everett Station, both ones that exist now and the light rail there in the future. And there were also some comments about connections to schools and colleges along the corridor, like Marysville Pilchuck High School and Everett Community College. For the access improvements, people are very excited about sidewalks and crosswalks. They would like to see a lot of those. And there were some suggestions to add bike lanes in some areas. We also asked about the center running transit only lanes. This was an open-ended question, so people could type in their responses or write them on the paper surveys. And key themes from that, a lot of people just simply reflected general positivity or that they didn't have any questions and were excited about the project. Specifically, we saw concerns about impacts to the general flow of traffic and wanting to make sure that the SWIFT project wasn't impacting that. There were a lot of concerns about how pedestrians will safely access the center stations. We have some illustrations that you've seen previously about how that works, but there were some questions about how that would operate. And then questions about how drivers would access businesses without the center turn lane being available, as that's utilized for the center running transit only lanes. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ian Stewart from EFMC to talk about the research.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to say thank you for your flexibility. I am coming to you. It's a real background behind me. I'm coming to you from Lincoln Park in West Seattle, where my daughter is running a cross-country race today. So I'm happy I was able to be here and that you're accommodating me. Let's continue. So the project we did is looking at opinions in the area. EMC is an opinion research company. We work for a variety of well-known entities in Puget Sound. This project specifically was to try to measure opinions in the area statistically representative, right? What you just saw in the public involvement, anyone could come and do that, which is great. We want people to get involved, but we also want to make sure we're reaching people who might not actually come out or represent their opinions, right? We want to get people where they're at so we can represent the views of the community in a statistically representative way. Our survey is designed to try to balance the unfamiliarity people have with the project. So we're assuming that people don't know really anything about the Gold Line. And then we progress along releasing little pieces of information, trying to minimize bias as much as we can to figure out how they react to those pieces of information about the Gold Line and its attributes. So this survey specifically is among registered voters in Arlington, Marysville, and North Everett. You can see a map of North Everett there. You can see what the boundaries were that we selected. People were sent an invitation via text message or email with a unique link to the web survey. So they were doing this self-administered. The survey averaged about 15 minutes in length. We did it July 13th through the 20th of 25. A total of 500 interviews. That works up to an overall margin of error of about plus or minus 4.5 percentage points. And you can see we have subsamples in Arlington, Marysville, and North Everett. And obviously in those places, fewer interviews, therefore the margin of error gets a little worse in those subregions. But we do have that information in case you're curious. So what did we do in the survey? We're going to hit on some of the highlights of the project. There are obviously more questions that we're going to have the time for to answer today, but let's continue on the highlights of the survey. One of the first things we do in the survey, you can look at the lower left-hand corner and see the question number. So this is very early in the survey. We asked an open-ended question here. What do you think is the most important transportation problem in your area today? When we ask an open-ended question, people are able to answer whatever they want. They could give a word, a sentence, and we code those into categories. And then you can see how they answer here what they think the most important problem in transportation is today. Traffic congestion, overcrowded roads, insufficient public transportation options are the first two items. You put those two together, right? The combination of those getting us into the 30–40% most important problem. When we talk about most important problem, we usually say about 10% is a significant response. You can see there's 4 of those over that here, right? And if you sort of put them together, there's a lot of answers that have to do with traffic and transportation congestion and lack of transportation options and public transportation options in here. So these are all pretty good signs for receptiveness to the Gold Line to begin with. The next question we asked for your benefit, we asked some favorability. So these are randomized. Anytime you see a battery like this, the questions are in a randomized order, so no one gets them in the same order anytime. We ask it on a scale of strongly favorable, somewhat unfavorable, and strongly unfavorable. We've collapsed the favorability on the far right side, so you can see the total favorable and the total unfavorable there. The blue is the favorable, the dark blue, and we'll talk about intensity here, the strongly favorable. So that's the most intense on this. On the opposite side, the strongly unfavorable is there on the red. The idea here is to help us understand what are people's general attitudes toward these organizations. And for community transit, it's the best rating of the 3 that we tested. It's 71/24. Sound Transit right behind is 67/30. So these are positive. We think about public entity ratings. We're usually looking for a 2-to-1 as a healthy favorable ratio. Sound Transit is just above that. Community transit is even higher above that, right? That's more like a 3-to-1 ratio when you're looking for community transit. So another good sign here for the Gold Line project that community transit is viewed favorably in the public. So one of the other questions we ask here early on is, how do you feel about adding more transit in the area? Do you agree or disagree that adding more transit service in Snohomish County is a good thing, whether or not I personally use it? You can see that's a really generic question on purpose, right? We're trying to understand what's the general attitude towards transit expansion. You can see here it's overwhelmingly on the side the agree. And the next time we bring in intensity is here. The strongly agree is 53%. So a majority of voters that we talked to in these three cities said, yes, I am strongly in favor of adding more transit service, even if I don't personally use it. One of the big themes here that you're going to want to be continuing to talk about with the Gold Line is how much advantage this is going to give to people who don't actually ever get on board, right? The ability for us to move other people out of their way is an important component in support for this project. We then asked about the existing SWIFT lines. We showed them a map and said, here's the existing SWIFT lines. We describe them to people and say, do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of that? You can see, again, we're giving people an option. They could use favorable or unfavorable. We're not pushing them in any direction here. The favorability here is 81%. So we're even higher than the favorability for community transit to begin with. The intensity is a little different. You can see the strongly favorable there at 31%. But we're still getting a really strong support for the SWIFT Gold lines in general. So the next thing we do is we look at the favorability rating from the initial, and then we're showing them a route map. So after we show them the route map, we're looking at that favorability to say, all right, now that you've seen the actual map of the route, what do you think of it? Favorability stays really consistent. You can see that it started at 83% there. It's still 83% after, but look at the intensity. It's now up a little bit at 49% strongly favored. So you see we're releasing little bits of information at a time. Now we go on to say, all right, here's some of the top features of the SWIFT Gold line. And we're asking how important those are to them. And on this slide, they're all very important. You can see the intensity, as we talked about, the very important going for 57 at the low end. That means a majority are saying that's very important. All the way to the top end at 81%, very important. You can see, again, these are all randomized, but we're seeing things like security features, reducing traffic as much as possible. Again, I mentioned that early on, that's going to be one of the main components of this. Minimizing construction disruption. This is clearly going to be an issue for people as the construction goes on. Giving people options to get around Snohomish County, minimizing car waits behind buses, and putting the SWIFT Gold line in areas that will have high population growth. These are all really important to people to hear about for the SWIFT Gold line and its components. So after we give people the additional piece of information, what happens to their favorability towards the line? The initial is there at the left. Then we show them the route map. Now, after the features, favorability hasn't really changed overall, but the intensity has. It's gone all the way up to 50% strongly favorable now, with only 60% unfavorable. So as people learn more about the project, they're even more in favor. Now we're like almost 90%, right? So we're a really strong majority here in favor of the SWIFT Gold line. So what we do next is we add additional pieces of information about the Gold line to see how people react to that. So in these additional pieces of information, we're asking, does that make you more or less favorable towards the project itself? The much more and somewhat more favorable there in the dark blue and the light blue. We've totaled them again on the far right. So as you look here at the details, once again, these are all randomized. The first one that's really popular, in fact, all four of these items, overwhelmingly popular, make people much more favorable towards the project. First, that it has all the funding it needs, 81% totally more favorable, but 62% that intensity much more. That it will connect to light rail in the future. That's really popular. That's one of the biggest selling points of the Gold line. That SWIFT comes really often. You don't need to schedule. You can just show up. That's also really popular. And then last on this list, you can choose to get your favorite business destinations and special events in downtown, or you can get downtown Seattle, or you can get to a flight. All these are very overwhelmingly popular in terms of adding additional support for the Gold line. Here's three more of those. Those are all pretty close. Statistically, they're kind of the same, right? When you look at them, these three talk about people's ability to get around Snohomish County quickly without a car. Even if you don't ride VRT, it makes it easier for people to get out of your way. We talked about that a few minutes ago, that's going to be an important pitch to people, that reducing traffic and getting people out of their way is going to reason why they might support this. And then finally, we talk about population growth in the area. Even this lowest one, 77% say they're much more favorable towards the project, 52% much more favorable. So lots of all this information, really positive in increasing favorability towards the SWIFT Gold line. So what happens with that information? You can see the total favorability doesn't change a lot much, but the strongly favorable is now at its highest point, 57% strongly favorable. Now we're at a larger majority saying they're favorable towards the project. So now we move into, this is later in the survey, obviously we're releasing more information about the set of running transit-only lanes. This is at the point we knew this might engender some different responses. So what we say here is that under consideration is that the Swift Gold Line might use dedicated center running lanes. We're doing this in text first on the left, right? We're trying to get a sense of how do people react to just the text-based version of the Swift Gold Lines that would travel in the center of the roadway. And we describe it to people. How do you feel about that? You can notice already the favorability has changed here, right? We sort of anticipated that the center running lanes might be a bit of a challenge for the project. And you can see the favorability is at 67% total, 32% unfavorable. So definitely a different, right? But then we also show them a video. What happens after we show them the video of the center running lanes working? We sort of presume that words alone might not be enough to describe what was happening. And you can see the favorability actually comes back up a bit. We're now to 70% favorable, 38% of that strongly after people see the video of how the center running lanes would operate. But we spend more time in the next slides, in the next questions, asking more about the center running lanes. So let's move to that. So here we're offering a whole bunch of other additional information. Again, these are all randomized on a scale of much more favorable or much less favorable towards that. All pieces of information are on the much more favorable side with differing levels of intensity. You can notice that now. The dark blue is quite a bit bigger at the top one versus the bottom one, 50% at the top and only 27% at the bottom. The first one probably people don't think about this, that emergency vehicles would be able to use the center running lanes and respond quicker to emergencies, 76% more favorable. As traffic increases, here's what the traffic increases are projected to be in the area with population growth. We want to make sure we can tackle that while managing center running lanes with improving traffic flow for everybody. And the rest of these are all also much more favorable ways to talk about the project that are adding up to giving community transit a lot of positive ways to talk about the benefits of center running lanes. That hasn't advanced for me yet. I'm not.
Oh, it went forward, Ian.
Okay, great. Okay, so these three, it switched for me. Thank you. So the favorability on these three you see are quite a bit lower. And I want you to notice that these three are probably the lines at which are going to be present the biggest challenges for the project. If you look at these three specifically, to maintain the same number of driving lanes, some areas along the corridor may need to be widened, which may require moving sidewalks and several feet closer to adjacent buildings. You can see this really divides people a lot more. The total less favorable is now at 48%. The next one, in order to have space for center running transit only lanes, most street parking would need to be removed in Everett. This also, and we heard this in focus groups as well when we asked this question, that the favorability was dropping here when we asked some of these key components of the project. And then finally, that there's two center running lanes. We describe essentially what center running lanes would mean for your left turns. That's the biggest unfavorability on this list. We're a majority with all of these three. So clearly it's an indication that as we move forward with this project, there's a lot of community work we're going to have to do to talk about this. There's going to be traffic impacts. There's going to be uncomfortableness, right, with these components of the project. So this is clearly flagging for the project team. These are going to be the biggest challenges that we're going to have to face. So, but the key question here is what happens after all that to overall favorability? I mentioned to you early, look at the track of this. Even after people see center running lanes, which you saw on its face, the reaction was not as favorable, right? But when we do this, even with everything told, after they've heard everything, favorability is still at 75% favorable to 25% unfavorable. So even knowing the center running lanes, yes, it does drop favorability a little bit, but it's still very strong overall for the project. At 48% strongly favorable and a 75% total favorable. So to conclude all this, and then we'll see if there's any questions. I didn't hear any as we moved along here. We saw that traffic congestion and lack of transit options are the leading transportation problems in the area. Vast majority, even though they might not use it, said that adding more transit service in the area is a good thing. And then we saw a big favorability for the existing Swift lines. The Swift Gold Line itself is well received throughout all three of the communities. In the suburbs, we see that as well. And then the concept of turning lanes does reduce some of the overall positivity toward the project, but it's still overwhelmingly positive by the time we end, even after people have heard all about the project. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know if we want to go back to any slides, so I guess we can leave it up here for a minute and see if there are specific questions about the slides I presented. But otherwise, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
And just flagging that we do have a few more slides, but if you have specific questions for Ian about the research, we can take those now.
Well, is Ian going to stay on? Or if we have questions for Ian, maybe we should ask him now. Does that make sense? So are there questions for Ian? Mayor Neri.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I got some of my questions out of the way yesterday. Did a very good job presenting to our Public Works Committee at the City of Marysville yesterday, but the community transit staff did. I'm sorry, Ian. A couple of things did come up while you were presenting. So when you looked at when we had the respondents, I think there's 275 in Marysville, 111 in Arlington, and I can't remember how many in Everett, but how did you, and I realize, you know, that I appreciate that this is a scientific survey. That's important. Margin of error of, you know, 5-6%. In Marysville, 5.9%, I think, which is not bad at all. But how did you get the respondents? Like, in other words, was it a mailing and then the people that called in were the ones that you included in the survey? Was it a random phones and whoever picked up?
So this was done via text message and email invitation, but those invitations are very generic. So if you responded to that, you really didn't know what the topic was going to be about. And then as we do that, we ensure we're tracking the demographics, existing demographics, and geographic distribution of voters within all three of the cities. So it represents what the rough voter population looks like in all three of those communities. So, but to your point, people don't know what they're coming to talk about, right? They don't know if this could be about anything as far as they know.
That's critical. Okay, because if you're just sending something out about a Swift bus, you're likely to get people that are pretty pro bus, or they're, yeah, I want to answer this. I'm into, just like
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And then are you able to, and I realize this might be, you might not, are you able to break this out by jurisdiction, the numbers? In other words, are you
So the
able
three
to,
cities, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I guess, are you able to, I mean, the numbers you gave there, are you able to break that out by jurisdiction? The exact same thing you gave, can you just break it out for Marysville, break it out for Everett, break it out for Arlington, break it out for county?
Yes, in the interest of time that we had today, we did not include that, but we do have that information.
Okay, great. I would be interested in seeing that. Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Neri, thank you. Other questions on the dais over here? Any questions? Anybody online that, I don't think anybody's online. Any? Okay, all right. Oh, well, Ian, you can stay or you could go run behind your daughter if you like, but turn it back over to the panel here and so take it away.
Great. Yeah, we just have a couple more slides and I'm happy to take more questions.
Okay.
So as I mentioned at the beginning, from what I shared and what Ian shared, we wanted to draw a couple conclusions. So in both the engagement and the scientific research survey, we asked, what is your opinion of the proposed Swift Gold Line? And in Ian's presentation, you saw that they asked that many times. We took the last time that they asked it here for the research on the right, and we only asked it once in the engagement. But overall, an 85% favorability rating in the engagement and a 75% favorability rating in the research. So the engagement is a bit higher. That is what you might expect based on the type of people that might respond to a survey about Swift Gold Line, but it is fairly similar. You can see kind of the distribution is similar in the bars there. Overall, we saw a majority of respondents support the Swift Gold Line project, the routing through downtown Everett, and the proposed use of center running transit-only lanes. There's a lot of enthusiasm for improvements to sidewalks, crosswalks, and the flow of traffic. And there were concerns about how pedestrians will safely access those center stations or a need to further understand how they would access them. And we also got some requests to further study impacts. Morgan's going to talk a little bit about those in a minute, so I'm going to leave that to her. Morgan, would you like to talk about next steps?
That minute was a quick minute. So as we've been hearing all of this different information, we're really trying to highlight what we've learned and then taking that and moving forward in the preliminary design. So that contract that we just awarded in September that Melissa mentioned, that's one of the key things that our consultant will be looking to solve. So we'll be continuing to evaluate, study, and kind of work through what those impacts look like. We'll be doing additional parking studies along Broadway, as well as those surrounding neighborhoods. We'll be doing some traffic analysis to determine the impacts to general purpose traffic and how the left turn lane would be queuing, different impacts to how you'd access different businesses. As we get closer to our next phase of engagement, we'll also be starting to reach out to those nearby businesses and parcel owners, starting to discuss like what's important to them, what are their needs, making sure that those are captured now, so we're accommodating and planning for those. And then lastly, I think everyone's aware it's a picture's worth 1,000 words. And so we'll be really working to refine our different communications and visuals, making sure we're providing a good representation for what each concept could look like, and how it might look and feel to them. So that will be done through those animations and then still images. So since we just kicked that preliminary design contract off, we'll be marching towards that first milestone, which will be that 10% design, which will then be moving forward to that phase 3 engagement timeline next year. But in order to kind of take that first step, that will be the data collection aspect. So that's what we're gearing into next, where we're going to compile all the existing conditions, looking at existing as-built. We'll be conducting our corridor survey, and then working to start beginning to culminate our design concepts for that 10% milestone. So just kind of a few touch points for what you should expect next from the Swift Gold team. So next up will be that phase 3 engagement. We're anticipating that will probably be likely towards the middle of 2026. Thereafter, we would be coming back with a draft LPA, locally preferred alternative, and then going into phase 4 with that draft of that locally preferred alternative, and then coming back to the board for final LPA approval. From there, we would move in, completing 30%, and then from there, we'd move into final design. And as you're aware, federal funding is critical for this project. And so that's early 2027 is when we would be submitting our capital investment grant application. And then we'd be continuously updating you guys on progress, moving into final design, and then hearing from the president's budget in 2028. And I think that wraps up our presentation. Happy to take additional questions from you guys.
Okay, board members. Good. How many? 2 or 3? Mayor Darren.
I started last time. I don't,
Go ahead. That's right.
yeah, thank you. I appreciate the work Community Transit's done on this from the outset. It's been very professionally done. I appreciate Rick's reaching out really early on. I just wanted to share with the board, just from the city of Marysville standpoint, there's always been some concern about the center running lane concept, primarily because of the access to businesses and the ability to get left throughout our main corridor. And I wanted to just explain a little bit about this because these are some issues I'll probably bringing up over the next half year as we move towards, an informed decision on what this board might recommend. And you've got to have the jurisdictional support, whether it be Everett or Marysville or Arlington, I think, and on a locally preferred alternative. We also widened this area you're talking about from 3 to 5 lanes over the last several years, just completed that last summer. And so we've got to be careful in making sure that the community and the businesses who went through that widening and all the stuff that goes with multi-year construction projects, and then you come back through a couple of years later and say, well, guess what? We're going to tear it up and we're going to do a center running turn lane, and one of those lanes is gone now for a transit project. So there's all kinds of dynamics at play, here when you try to do something like this. And as you all know, governing your local jurisdiction, our ears as council members or mayors are really close to the ground in our communities. Community Transit's responsibility is to figure out how to fund transit projects and SWIFT lines and all of that. And so they're generally those mesh, I think, for the most part, but they won't always mesh perfectly. And Rick's been really good about walking through that. I know with me, and I think with the other jurisdictions as well. And you guys have done a great job with that. And this survey is very helpful. It actually is encouraging in some aspects, more encouraging maybe than we thought. So I would encourage the board to really look at that. And even though Everett's not part of the Community Transit Board, I'm curious. I have spoken with Mayor Franklin one time about this. And so I do have some initial thoughts, but as we get beyond elections and everything, I would be curious as to, incorporating them in, particularly on this center running lane concept, even though they don't have a representative on the board. What we don't want to do is get ourselves in a scenario where we're not moving forward without strong local support for whatever option we choose. I'll say that for Marysville for sure, but I would also want to know that, you know, for Everett, Arlington doesn't have to deal at all with the center running turn lane. And I'll be honest, if we didn't have the center running turn lane, I think your approval rating in Marysville would probably be in the 90s. You know, that's probably the only thing that's gonna be something that the council members and I and our staff will have to really wrestle with. So anyway.
Yeah, I think one thing I would say is we're trying to mimic the experience that you're having with us on the Swift Gold Line with all three of our jurisdictions. And so
Okay.
even though Mayor Franklin isn't at the table and you're seeing, you know, you don't have as much visibility to that, we're trying to make sure that as we make the rounds and we share information, that we're doing that as an, you know, equally among the three jurisdictions so that everyone, you feel well stitched together if you run into Mayor Franklin at event
Yeah.
and you guys are working off of the same playbook.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Councilmember Daughtry?
That answered my question.
Oh, perfect. Other folks? Councilmember Flynn?
Yeah, I don't have a question. However, I have some information that's going to have a huge impact. It just happened Monday. And anyway, the city of Arlington, the city council on Monday night approved a sub-area plan for Island Crossing. I was the only one who voted no. That plan starts immediately. They've already got two contractors who are building high-rise hotels, restaurants. They did a complete zoning change so that it covers every single business you can possibly think of. And that's going to come off on 530, which is Island Crossing. And WashDOT just got the funding for that roundabout there. And that's going to increase the transportation off of 530 down Smoky Point Boulevard. And that needs to be really looked at when you guys are doing your thing, because it was one of the reasons I voted no, because it's far, far too much and it's going to impact, it'll spread clear across the freeway, all the way down Smoky Point Boulevard. And like I say, it's starting immediately past that Monday night.
Thank you. We'll need to dig into that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jan. Any other comments? Let me see, who we have online that still might want to make a comment? Is Danny still online? Is Danny there?
She is online, but she's not, she's observing, so.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for this step and a lot of information there and a lot of impacts. And so we appreciate the depth and the quality of the research. I think all of us do. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay. All right. I think we're on to Chair's report here. And I don't really have much to add. The next regular meeting is scheduled for November 6th, our board meeting at 3 p.m. We have no executive session today. And in terms of board communication, I think I'll just, if you want, just raise your hand and I'll acknowledge you. And if not, any board communications, we're all good. We're all talked out and it's all good. Okay. All right. Any other business then for the good of the order during this workshop? And if not, I'm going to adjourn the workshop at 4:27 today. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everybody.